The central mystery of Citizen Kane is the dying words, or rather word, of the titular Kane. Mr. Thompson, a reporter, is assigned to find out what Rosebud means. He finds out that Kane was a man who was taken from his parents in his childhood, given an education and his parents' money. With his inheritance, he opened a newspaper, lived a filthy rich life, molded mass opinion, coasted through fame, tried running for office, got caught in a scandal, lost his money in the Depression, ruined his marriages with his first wife because they drifted apart, second wife because of his controlling nature, and died a lonely, heartbroken man. Throughout the film, we watch other characters give their own interpretations of who Kane was. No one really knew what drove Kane to do the things that he did, except us. The one piece of information that we the viewers have that no one else in the film has, not even his closest associates and lovers, is Rosebud. Rosebud gives us the key to unlocking, if not Kane, at least the motivations of Kane.
Mr. Charles Foster Kane has always been a communist.
Rosebud is Kane's enigmatic object of desire and stands for everything that Kane desires and everything that motivates him. Near the end of the film, Thompson, and indeed the audience too, gives up trying to find the meaning of Rosebud.
I don't think any word can explain a man's life.
But it can.
I was on my way to the Western Manhattan warehouse in search of my youth.
The meaning of Rosebud has been interpreted by most as Kane missing his childhood. In other words, Rosebud is seen as a loss of innocence.
Why aren't you coming with us, Mom?
Kane in his childhood lived a carefree life until Kane's mother chances upon a huge fortune and decides to literally sign him off to a bank, which would send him to the finest schools and colleges and ensure that his fortune is secured. We as the audience understand that Kane was sent away by his mother for what she felt was his own good.
What that kid needs is a good thrashing.
That's what you think, is it, Jim?
Yes.
That's why he's going to be brought up where you can't get at him.
But Kane subconsciously interprets this traumatic episode as the end of his childhood, or the end of his innocence, essentially.
On this occasion, that boy, Charles Foster Kane, personally attacked you after striking you in the stomach with a sled.
This fact, which is treated as a joke, is actually a very important event. As a child, Kane blames Thatcher for the end of his childhood, and he lashes out violently against him, hitting him with the sled. The sled we all know as Rosebud. Of course, the well-meaning Thatcher wishes to take Kane away to turn him into an elite person, for which he gets Kane's parents' approval.
I don't hold with signing my boy away to any bank as guardian.
I want you to stop all this nonsense.
Well, at least his mother's. But the child Kane does not know this, and he internalizes this connection between Thatcher and the end of his innocence. As an adult too, though he does not physically lash out against Thatcher, he still remains hostile to him and rebels by not listening to Thatcher and instead doing the opposite to spite the man he perceives as the reason for his separation from his Rosebud or his innocence. Kane even uses his newspapers to attack companies where he himself owns the majority shares to show his contempt for the material wealth he has, which in his mind he connects to Thatcher.
What would you like to win? Everything you hate.
In this way, Rosebud represents the innocence that Kane lost when he was taken from his parents by Thatcher. But this is where most people stop with their interpretation of Rosebud. And this, I believe, is an error. If our premise that Rosebud explains everything about Kane's motivations is true, it must stand for something more than just his childhood.
You take Mr. Kane. It wasn't money he wanted.
Rosebud also represents the cost of materialistic success. In order for Kane to become so fabulously wealthy, he has to be first torn apart from his freedom and all that was dear to him. From then on, although he was an extremely wealthy person, he never had real freedom because that was the cost of his materialistic success. By real freedom, I don't mean that he wasn't free to spend his money as he wished. What this loss of freedom means is the presence of the gaze of the people. Whatever Kane does now is watched closely and followed by millions because of the wealth he has now. Kane can no longer simply do things without people commenting on it, reporting it, and judging him for it. At first, he revels under this gaze, as he presumes he will always be loved by the people. However, later he tries his best to protect himself from the eye of the people by retreating from the world entirely and building his own. Kane is a collector, and his materialistic tendencies are driven by this need to feel what Rosebud made him feel again. He collects more and more extravagant objects and finally resorts to collecting people.
He's collecting somebody that's collecting diamonds.
But owning things won't give him Rosebud. In fact, funnily enough, he does own Rosebud, the object, but he can't have what it represents. This is the symbol stripped of its meaning, an empty nothing, which is exactly what his materialistic tendencies get him to in the end. Nothing. Kane is remembered almost in a daze by the people close to him. His second wife remembers him in an alcoholic stupor. Bernstein and Thatcher are unreliable narrators, and Leland is losing his memory with age. Perhaps the film here is commenting on the futility of material existence. Even a man as great, as wealthy, as famous, and as influential as Kane will one day be forgotten, as the people close to him lose their memory of him. This is reinforced by the final image of the film, when his material possessions, like the sled Rosebud, burns, turning the very fruits of his labor into smoke.
Wasn't he ever in love with her?
He married for love. Love. That's why he did everything.
What's less talked about, and yet perhaps more important, is how Rosebud is also about control and the need to feel loved. With Thatcher's arrival, Kane's semblance of control over his life, of freedom, was taken away from him in one go. Since then, he's only ever wanted control back.
I'm gonna send you to Sing Sing!
Kane is a man defined by two things. He wants to be loved and he wants control. Because of the way control was taken away from his life when Thatcher shows up, Kane has subconsciously equated the loss of control of his life with the loss of his mother, or rather, the loss of love. Therefore, Kane feels that a person in control who can exercise power will also be loved.
Sure. I'm Charles Foster Kane. Whatever you want, just name it and it's yours. But you gotta love me.
Twice in the film, the same composition is used to show Kane losing control to certain authoritarian figures in his life. The first time, he is a child being forced against his will to leave his parents. The camera traps Kane visually, flanked on both sides by figures of authority. He has lost his agency completely. The second time, he is being forced by his wife and his opponent to not contest the elections. With Kane in the center both times, the figures of authority are blocking his exits on both sides of the frame, trapping him. In 3 other instances in the film, Kane is visually shown to be losing control of his life. Here, the child Kane is shown in the background in the middle of the frame, small in size compared to his towering mother who is deciding his future. In this scene, he is not only powerless to control his future, he is not even a part of the conversation about his future. This visual idea of representing Kane as smaller than the people deciding his life is repeated again here. Kane's life is being talked about again by Thatcher and Bernstein. However, this time he's part of the conversation, and in fact slowly gets bigger and bigger, and in the end towers over the others as he starts taking control of his life back. Here he is being threatened to not contest the elections. Kane is again towered over by his challenger Gettys and his wife. Yet again his future is being decided by the people in his lives as he's forced to watch on until this happens.
I'm staying here. There's only one person in the world to decide what I'm going to do, and that's me.
Now Kane holds all the power and makes his choice by standing his ground and retaking control. But he finds, for the first time in his life, that by retaking control, he has not been able to retake love. An important theme in the film is Kane constantly trying to control people, or rather, people's love for him. Kane tries to control his second wife's entire life by making her an opera star, even though she clearly doesn't want to and claims that she doesn't have the voice for it. He keeps her trapped in his house, even though she wants to leave, and when she leaves, he begs her not to go. He cannot have yet another person he loves leave him, just like his mother.
Well, you know what mothers are like.
Yes, I know.
While Kane is unable to control the people in his lives, he is an avid collector of statues. This is a telling sign of the workings of Kane's psychology.
There's a lot of pictures and statues in Europe you haven't bought yet.
Because statues can be controlled absolutely, but people cannot.
You just want to persuade people that you love them so much that they ought to love you back.
Kane also tries his best to earn the love not only of the people in his life, but the masses.
You talk about the people as though you own them.
Kane ultimately loses the love of the ones around him, and also the love of the masses, because he tries to control them with his wealth and his power.
People will think.
What I tell them to think.
In the end, he thinks back to the last time he felt love, and that he had control in his life. If you like to see more film analysis and video essays, remember to subscribe. If you liked the video, please do like and share, and let me know what you think of this video in the comments.